The airport loudspeaker echoed through the vast terminal. But what made people turn their heads was not the boarding announcement. It was the sight of a middle-aged woman in dark joggers and a simple long-sleeved shirt being stopped at the priority gate. Brenda Miller, a gate agent whose weary eyes showed the weight of years at LAX, glanced from the woman's sneakers to her neatly tied hair. No designer bag, no glittering jewelry, none of the aura of power. To Brenda, this was simply a passenger out of place. "Ma'am, economy line is over there," Brenda said sweetly, but with a blade hidden in her tone. The word ma'am cut into pride like a knife. Standing just behind her, 7-year-old assistant Ethan Wells flushed with anger. How could someone like her, Sophia Grant, be treated this way? He had seen her walk into a boardroom and silence an army of lawyers with a single question. He had watched her sway the most skeptical investors and turn impossible deals in her favor. Yet here, in the middle of the crowd, she was reduced to nothing simply because of her modest appearance. Sophia did not react. Her eyes were calm like a still lake, reflecting everything without a ripple. No arguments, no explanations, only quiet as she lifted her phone, the screen lit with the words, "First class." But Brenda did not look. In her narrow world, anyone in joggers could not possibly belong in that line. What seemed like a small, ordinary scene was in truth the spark, a tiny refusal that would soon set fire to a multi-billion-dollar airline. Sophia lowered her hand. Her gaze was cold and steady, but Ethan felt the air shift as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. All she did was unlock her phone and send a short message to the company's COO. Just 5 words, but they carried the force of an earthquake. "Execute Protocol Indigo, immediate." No one in the crowd knew that in the cargo hold below lay something more precious than any treasure, a small lung destined to save the life of a 7-year-old girl in New York. And no one realized that the woman being dismissed from the priority gate was the very person who controlled the fate of the airline itself. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding, questions exploding in his mind. Why didn't she explain? Why didn't she reveal who she was? But when Sophia's eyes passed over him, it was as if all questions were answered in a single instant. You don't argue with those who cannot see your worth. You act. At Grant Dynamics headquarters miles away, David Chen's phone vibrated. He read the message, his face draining of color. Protocol Indigo, the ultimate weapon, the doomsday clause in the contract with Phoenix Air, had never been used. Until today. Within seconds, the system began to shake. Medical cargo flights vanished from schedules. Phoenix Air's booking database went dark, and it all began with one cutting remark at Gate 44B. Brenda kept smiling stiffly at the next passengers, unaware that she had just unleashed a storm. Sophia stepped back from the line, her voice soft as a breeze, yet heavy enough to crush a corporation, as she said to Ethan, "We will not be flying today." In that moment, silence wrapped around her. Not weak, but the silence of a woman who could bring an airline to its knees with a single message. The noise at LAX was as chaotic as ever. The clatter of suitcase wheels, the cries of restless children, the distorted announcements repeating endlessly. Yet in an office hundreds of miles away, a single ping from a phone made a man's heart stop. David Chen, 50th and 2, COO of Grant Dynamics, sat in a conference room where an international cargo route map stretched across the screen. He was a calm man, one who had handled dozens of global crises, but when the words appeared on his phone, "Execute Protocol Indigo, immediate," the blood in his veins ran cold. Protocol Indigo, a name spoken like legend inside the company. A kill switch, designed only for use when a partner violated terms so severely that patient lives were endangered. It had never, not once, been activated. David shot to his feet, every eye in the room fixed on him, stunned by the sudden change in the face of the usually composed COO. Without a word, he strode into the hallway, his hands trembling slightly as he entered a security code into his computer. A black screen appeared with a single line of text. "Confirm execution, Phoenix Air contract." He closed his eyes briefly. He knew this was irreversible, but an order from Sophia Grant was never up for debate. Drawing a deep breath, he typed in his password. Enter. Instantly, the global system shuddered. In Dallas, at Phoenix Air headquarters, Robert Sterling, Senior Vice President for Corporate Clients, had just bitten into his sandwich when red alerts filled his screen. A flood of emails crashed into his inbox. Immediate contract termination, Clause 34B. Chargeback initiated, $28 million. All Monroe/Grant cargo bookings cancelled. Robert spat coffee across his desk. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. The biggest, most critical contract had vanished with just a few keystrokes. The desk phone rang. On the line, the cargo operations director screamed into his ear. "We've lost every Grant Dynamics shipment. All of them. The system is burning red. Do you understand? That cargo is the lifeblood of our entire West Coast operation. Without them, we are finished." Robert's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he yanked at his tie. In his head, a single terrifying question echoed, what happened at Gate 44B? Meanwhile, back at LAX, Brenda continued scanning boarding passes, her voice flat as she offered bland greetings to passengers. She had no idea that every press of her scanner had become the center of a global storm. Frank Davies, 50, regional supervisor, had just taken an emergency call from Dallas. His face was ashen, sweat pouring down like rain. He sprinted toward Gate 44B, lungs burning, heart pounding. "Brenda," he barked as he reached her. "What happened here? Did you have contact with anyone from Grant Dynamics?" Brenda blinked, confused. "Grant Dynamics? I just processed passengers as usual. A few people, but nobody important." Frank's eyes swept the crowd, and then he froze. Just a few steps away, near a newsstand, stood a woman in dark joggers, silent, composed, exuding a chilling calm. Beside her, a young man looked pale as chalk. Frank's throat tightened. A memory flashed in his mind, the cover of Forbes on his desk, the face of a woman in a power suit. Sophia Grant. His throat closed, his whole body trembling. He understood, and that understanding cut like a knife. His own employee had just humiliated the one woman who could bring down Phoenix Air with a single message. Sophia glanced at the silver watch on her wrist, her eyes steady, as if everything had unfolded exactly as planned. Ethan glanced at her, his chest constricting, and to him her silence thundered like a storm. She had already acted. An airline had just been laid on the operating table, and the one holding the scalpel was the very woman who minutes ago had been dismissed from the priority line. The giant electronic board at Terminal 4 flickered, then suddenly changed. The words, "On time for Phoenix Air Flight 762 bound for JFK," shifted to "delayed." Before passengers could even question it, just seconds later, "delayed" vanished, replaced by a colder word, "pending." Murmurs erupted. Phones were pulled out. People snapped photos and recorded videos, a wave of unease spreading quickly. No one knew that pending was not a simple technical glitch. It was the signal of a collapse. Brenda Miller frowned at her scanner as it suddenly rejected every boarding pass, flashing red over and over. She tapped the machine, muttering under her breath, "System must be down again." But Frank Davies, the regional manager, rushed in, breathless, his face as pale as ash. He stared at Brenda, his voice trembling. "Who did you talk to? Did you see anyone from Grant Dynamics?" Brenda blinked, confused, and shrugged. "I just saw a woman dressed like she was going to yoga, obviously not first class. I told her to get in the economy line." Frank's eyes widened, the muscles in his face twitching. In his mind, the calm face and the still lake gaze of the woman by the newsstand returned. Sophia Grant. He felt the ground beneath his feet give way. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Robert Sterling, Senior Vice President of Corporate Clients, was in a frenzy inside his office. He shouted into the phone, "We just lost every biological shipment for Grant Dynamics. Every single flight tied to them has been cancelled. Do you understand what that means? They are 40% of our cargo revenue." The voice on the other end, the head of operations, sounded on the verge of tears. "The system is bleeding red, Bob. All contract data has been pulled, schedules wiped clean. Without Grant, half our flights this afternoon will lose money. This is a catastrophe." Robert clawed at his tie, his chest tightening as he scrambled for answers. Why? How? And then came the devastating detail from headquarters. The crisis originated at Gate 44B, LAX. At the airport, chaos swelled. Crowds surged toward the ticket counter, voices sharp with frustration. "I have a connection to Paris in 1 hour. Are you just going to leave me stranded here? Tell us what's happening." Brenda forced a stiff smile, but the noise grew louder, mixed with children crying and luggage slamming against the floor. She looked around for help, but Frank stood frozen, eyes locked on the woman by the newsstand. Sophia Grant had not pushed, had not raised her voice. She stood still, her fingers gliding lightly across her phone, calm in a way that was terrifying. Young Assistant Ethan Wells looked pale, his eyes darting nervously, bracing for the storm about to break. Trembling, he whispered, You really cancelled the flight?" Sophia gave a slight nod. Her voice was steady, almost like a lesson, but every word struck like a hammer. When someone shows you they don't value you, believe them and act. At that moment, the airport's internal radio crackled with the tense voice of the control tower. "Gate 44B, be advised. Directive from Phoenix Corporate. Flight 762. Grounded. Repeat. Grounded. Frank shouted desperately into his radio. Grounded? The aircraft is fueled, the cargo sealed. Why cancel now? The voice that came back was low, grim, like a funeral bell. The primary cargo has just been pulled by its legal owner. Grant Dynamics has terminated all contracts with Phoenix Air. This plane has no authorized mission. Until they reclaim the cargo, this flight cannot depart. Frank froze, cold sweat pouring down his face. Brenda looked at him, panic in her eyes. That's impossible. She was just an ordinary passenger. I didn't know. Frank turned to her, his voice choked, as if speaking to himself as well. She is no ordinary passenger. She is Sophia Grant. And you just pushed this entire airline off a cliff. What? At a distance, Sophia lifted her eyes from her phone. They were quiet as the night, but within them lay the power to make an apple tremble. No shouting, no argument, just one silent decision, and the world had shifted. Frank Davies felt his legs turn to stone. 20 years of loyalty to Phoenix Air were crumbling into dust before his eyes, all because of a single moment at Gate 44B. Sweat trickled down his neck. He swallowed hard, then forced himself to take a deep breath and step forward. The woman in joggers still stood by the newsstand, calm and composed, as if the chaos around her had nothing to do with her. Ethan Wells stood close by, his young face still etched with shock. Frank could feel his own heart pounding as each step carried him nearer. Mrs. Grant? His voice trembled, awkward, like a man awaiting judgment. Sophia Grant lifted her head. Her gaze rested on Frank, not angry, not resentful, but so sharp in its silence that it made him shiver. He tried to smile, but his face was stiff. I'm Frank Davies, regional manager for Phoenix at LAX. I believe there has been a terrible misunderstanding here. His eyes flicked toward Brenda, who stood pale as if she had seen a ghost. Sophia did not answer at once. She simply folded her phone and slipped it into her pocket. That calm composure made Frank feel like a schoolboy waiting for a teacher to announce his final grade. No, Sophia finally spoke, each word dropping like the blade of a cold knife. There is no misunderstanding. Your employee looked at me, made a judgment, and acted on that prejudice. I simply accepted that judgment. Frank's throat tightened. Please, allow me to fix this. We'll seat you in first class immediately. I'll deal with that employee at once. This was just a small mistake, nothing that... Sophia's brow furrowed slightly, her gaze cutting like a knife. A small mistake? She tilted her head, her voice dropping, short and heavy like the strike of a hammer. You call insulting a customer, dismissing them because of their clothing or their skin color a small mistake. You call disregarding a partner that carries thousands of lives a trivial matter? Frank opened his mouth, but no words came. Every sentence she spoke struck directly at his deepest fear. Ethan, standing nearby, saw his boss reveal an absolute coldness for the first time. It made him shudder, torn between awe and fear. Sophia continued, her voice firm. The contract between Grant Dynamics and Phoenix Air has been terminated. It cannot be negotiated. It cannot be restored. Frank felt as if lightning had struck him. His voice cracked as he cried, "No, you can't. That contract is our lifeline. Without it, the whole system will—" "Yes," Sophia cut him off, her tone steady. "It will collapse. Because you allowed a front-line employee to decide who deserves respect. And when that culture exists, it is not the problem of one individual. It is a disease that corrodes the entire organization." The air around them grew heavy. Brenda trembled at the counter, each word tearing at her fate. Frank dropped to his knees on the spot, his voice breaking. "Mrs. Grant, please give us a chance. I'll fire her immediately. I'll compensate you double, triple. Please, the airline will die without you." Sophia looked at him, her eyes cold, but carrying a sorrow that words could not describe. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She only shook her head slightly. "You don't understand, Frank. This is not about money. This is about trust, about the lives of patients waiting on the other end. If an airline cannot uphold respect at the gate, how can I trust it to maintain standards in the cargo hold, carrying a heart, a lung, or a life?" Her words tolled through Terminal 4 like a funeral bell. Ethan looked at Frank and saw a man utterly broken. Behind him, Brenda stood pale, eyes shimmering with tears. In her mind, one thought spun endlessly. "What have I done? I dragged the entire company into the abyss." Sophia no longer looked at them. She turned to Ethan, her voice calm but resolute. "Come. We have more important work to do." And with that, she walked away, her steps steady, leaving behind an earthquake. Frank Davies remained on his knees, his breath ragged, sweat pouring as if he had crossed a desert. Brenda stood frozen behind him, her trembling hands clutching a stack of boarding passes. But Sophia Grant no longer paid them any attention. She walked away, each step slow yet steady, her white sneakers tapping softly on the marble floor of Terminal 4. Ethan Wells followed close, his heart pounding wildly. "Mrs. Sophia," he asked in a trembling voice, "what about the cargo in the hold? The little girl's lung? If the contract is cancelled, it will—" Sophia turned to him, her gaze sharp as a blade cutting through fear. "I will never let a child die because of their negligence. Now it is time to initiate Helios." She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen like a pianist over keys. Her voice was low and steady, yet each word carried the weight of a battlefield command. "David, Indigo is complete. Now activate Helios. I want a G550 on the private runway at LAX in 40 minutes. The medical team must reach Phoenix's cargo bay in 10. Full authorization under Crimson." On the other end, David Chen did not question. He answered with a single, crisp line. "Understood. Helios is active." Minutes later, the familiar hum of the airport was broken by the roar of engines. Two sleek black vans bearing the embossed logo of Grant Dynamics like a pounding heartbeat sped into the restricted zone under security escort. 6 specialists in grey jumpsuits emerged, every movement precise and silent. There was no shouting, no wasted motion. They operated like a unit that had rehearsed this thousands of times. Their commander raised a tablet, the screen displaying the digital signatures of Sophia Grant and David Chen. "Warrant of Retrieval Level 1, Biotransport." The Phoenix cargo supervisor's hands shook as he scanned the document. It was fully authorized, protected by unforgeable encryption. There was no way to resist. Bay 3, open now, the commander ordered. The cargo doors swung open, a wave of icy air spilling out like the breath of an abyss. The Grant Dynamics technicians moved forward, handling the biological container with delicate precision. Inside, the tiny lung meant for a 7-year-old girl remained intact, preserved like the most precious treasure. It took only 7 minutes. The entire retrieval unfolded like a perfectly scored symphony. When the cargo doors closed again, Phoenix Air had lost control of its fate. On the giant departure board in the terminal, one final line appeared. Flight 762. Cancelled. The waiting hall erupted. Passengers shouted in fury, slamming luggage against the floor, demanding answers. Children cried. Voices rose. "I have a connection to Boston. What reason do you have for this cancellation?" Brenda trembled, her face drained of color, lips quivering as she tried to force a smile. Frank Davies stood like a statue, realizing it was not just one flight that had been cancelled. It was his career and an entire airline bleeding out by the second. Outside, a black Escalade slid into the private zone. Its door opened, and Sophia stepped in with Ethan. From the back seat, Ethan glanced out and saw the grey Grant Dynamics vans pulling away from the cargo area, escorting the priceless container. "Will we make it in time?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking with worry. Sophia leaned back, her eyes fixed on the crimson lolo of the Los Angeles sunset. "We will," she answered simply, "because we never let anyone decide the fate of our patients but ourselves." The vehicle sped away, leaving behind the chaos of a collapsing terminal. In less than an hour, a massive airline had lost its most vital partnership, all because of the contemptuous smirk of a single employee. Sophia Grant did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to argue. She only needed one decision, one signal, and the world was forced to turn. In Dallas, the heart of Phoenix Air, massive control room screens glowed an ominous red. Warnings flashed non-stop. Booking cancelled. Cargo contract voided. System unstable. Robert Sterling, Senior Vice President for Corporate Clients, buried his face in his hands. He had just endured 10 harrowing minutes, with the next quarter's revenue wiped out and hundreds of global flights rendered meaningless. Worse still, the news had already reached Wall Street. On the electronic boards of the New York Stock Exchange, the letters PHX, Phoenix Air's ticker, plunged without pause. 3%, then 5%, then 9%. In less than an hour, more than $400 million in market value had vanished like dust scattered to the wind. At LAX, Frank Davies was on the verge of collapse. His phone rang relentlessly, messages from headquarters hammering him. "Identify the Grant Dynamics passenger. Report full incident at the gate. Contain the media crisis at all costs." He trembled as his eyes searched the terminal until they found Sophia Grant stepping into her car. Her pace was quiet, unhurried, yet Frank felt as though he were watching a goddess of justice pass by, leaving behind devastation that he alone would bear. In a corner office on the 50th floor of Phoenix Air headquarters in Dallas, CEO Mark Ingersoll slammed his phone against the desk. A Wall Street analyst had just screamed into his ear, "Did a Phoenix jet crash? Why is your stock tanking?" Mark gasped, his face flushed red. He had never seen a nightmare strike this fast. With shaking hands, he dialed a number he had copied from a confidential email months earlier, a private line he had hoped never to use. 3 rings. Then a voice, calm and cutting, answered. Sophia Grant. Mark drew a long breath, forcing himself to speak. Mrs. Grant, this is Mark Ingersoll. I want to extend the deepest apology on behalf of all of Phoenix Air. What my staff did to you was unacceptable. The employee has been dismissed. The station manager has been suspended. We will immediately launch retraining for 80,000 employees. This is a turning point. Please give us a chance to make it right. Sophia's voice was steady, without a flicker of emotion. I hear your apology. But can you guarantee that this will never happen again? That no patient will ever be put at risk because of a frown or a misjudgment at a boarding gate? Mark hesitated. He knew the truth. He was the CEO, yet even he could not control every employee, every moment. We will do our very best, he muttered. Do your best, Sophia repeated, as if tasting the words. Then she ended it coldly. Not enough. The contract remains cancelled. But to ensure patients are not harmed, my team will coordinate a 90-day transition. After that, everything ends. A single click. The line went dead. Mark collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. The story of a billion-dollar airline had been ended by the swipe of a phone. In the Escalade speeding toward the private terminal, Ethan Wells sat in silence. He had heard the entire call over the speaker. Inside him a storm raged, part of him awed by Sophia's absolute power, part of him unsettled by the reality that she had cast an entire corporation into the abyss over one insult. Sophia looked out the window at the lights of Los Angeles rising against the night. Her voice was soft, yet every word rang clear. Ethan, remember this. Power is not shouting in someone's face until they change. True power is when you can walk away and let them collapse into the emptiness you leave behind. Ethan swallowed hard. In that moment, he understood he was not merely the assistant to a CEO. He was witnessing a master of power rewriting the rules of the game. As the black Escalade entered the private suite area of LAX, the scene was a world apart from the chaos of Terminal 4. There were no shouts from angry passengers, no weary announcements over crackling speakers. Only soft golden light stretched across the runway, where a gleaming Gulfstream G550 waited, its polished body reflecting the lights like a silver blade slicing the night sky. Sophia Grant stepped out, her sneakers touching the ground lightly. She did not glance around. She did not rush. Yet every Grant Dynamics staff member was already lined up, ready for her command. 6 technicians in gray jumpsuits had just returned from Phoenix's cargo bay, carrying the biological container, kept at stable temperature. Ethan Wells stood in awe. He had never witnessed such flawless coordination. Every person moved as if rehearsed 1,000 times, without wasted words, without hesitation. The container holding the tiny lung, the one that would determine the survival of a little girl in New York, was lifted onto the jet by hydraulic platform and secured in a perfectly isolated compartment. A technician gave a short report. Temperature 36 degrees, stable. Time remaining for transport, 4 hours and 35 minutes. Still within safe range. Sophia nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. Inside the aircraft, the cream leather interior was a striking contrast to the tension of the mission. Ethan sat silently across from Sophia, still shaken, while she opened her tablet, fingers swiftly moving across weather maps and flight paths. The captain, a middle-aged man with a military bearing, entered and saluted. "We've received Helios orders. The route has been cleared. NYPD will escort directly from JFK to Mount Sinai. We are scheduled to take off in 6 minutes." Sophia looked up. "Not 6, 3. The captain nodded firmly, understanding that to her every minute was a life. He turned, his voice sharp as it echoed through the radio. "Prepare for takeoff in 3. The Rolls-Royce engines roared to life, their deep thunder vibrating through the cabin. Runway lights flared as the G550 surged forward. Inside, Ethan gripped the seat, his heart racing, while Sophia sat still, eyes half closed. She knew the race against death had just begun. Outside the window, Los Angeles shimmered beneath them, falling away quickly. The aircraft pierced through grey clouds and into the vast night sky. Inside, the silence was so complete that only the low hum of engines remained. Ethan struggled to find words until he finally whispered, "Mrs. Sophia, do you ever feel afraid when making decisions like Indigo, when bringing an entire corporation to its knees?" Sophia opened her eyes and met his. Her gaze was both tender and unyielding. "Of course I feel fear, Ethan. But I don't fear stock prices falling or a CEO losing his seat. I fear a child missing surgery. I fear a family losing their child because someone at an airport gate failed to show respect." Ethan said nothing, his chest heavy with a mix of reverence and unease. A soft chime sounded. On the cabin screen, the flight path showed ETA 4 hours and 12 minutes. Another screen displayed the stable vitals of the lung inside the container. Sophia exhaled slowly, then looked out the window. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. In that moment, she looked like a general, a sage, and a mother carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Back at Terminal 4, where she had just departed, the chaos only grew. Frank Davies was swarmed by relentless calls from Dallas. Brenda Miller was escorted by 2 security officers into a private room, her face pale as chalk. And on Wall Street, Phoenix air continued to plunge. High above, the G550 hurtled eastward, a silent yet brutal race, where every passing minute meant the difference between life and death. The Gulf Stream, 550, sliced through the endless night sky. Inside, the cabin glowed with soft golden light, luxurious yet stiflingly silent. The electronic display at the back read ETA, 3 hours, 58 minutes. The time was still within the safe limit, but the margin shrank with every passing minute. Ethan Wells sat across, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air. His eyes were fixed on Sophia Grant, who sat upright, her gaze locked on the monitor displaying the vitals of the biological container. Each steady, simulated heartbeat on the graph represented a piece of the little girl's life in New York. Suddenly, Sophia's wristwatch vibrated softly. She tapped it, and a voice came through. "Dr. Grant, we need an update immediately." This is Dr. Anna Sharma at Mount Sinai. The surgical team is ready, but the buffer time has dropped to only 50 minutes. Can you guarantee the ETA? The air inside froze. Ethan swallowed hard. This was the question that placed an entire life squarely on Sophia's shoulders. She did not hesitate. Her voice was deep, clear, each word carrying absolute authority. Dr. Sharma, prepare your team. The moment I step off at JFK, the container will be in your hands. 58 minutes, no more, no less. A breath of silence came through. Then Dr. Sharma replied firmly, "We will trust you. Do not let this child down." The call ended. Ethan turned to Sophia, eyes wide. You just made a promise you cannot guarantee with absolute certainty. What if something goes wrong? Sophia cut him off, her voice cold as steel. Nothing will go wrong. When you leave room for doubt, life is already lost. Outside, the sky was ink black. The jet surged forward, its red and green lights blinking like a racing heartbeat. In Sidsaun, the Grant Dynamics technicians sat silently, their eyes glued to the container monitor, ready to respond to the slightest fluctuation. Ethan felt different. To him, it was as if he were seated across from someone who was more than a CEO, but a commander on an invisible battlefield. One decision from her could erase hundreds of millions of dollars, topple an entire corporation, yet at the same time preserve the fragile life of a child. His mind replayed the moment at Gate 44B. Sophia had shown no anger, no argument. She had sent one message, and that message was now shaking the entire aviation world. Suddenly the plane shuddered. The captain's voice came calmly over the speaker. "We are entering a patch of turbulence. It will stabilize in a few minutes." Ethan gripped his seat, heart skipping. But Sophia did not move. Her gaze remained steady as she said quietly, "Do not worry. The only thing that matters is not the shaking in the air, but the final minute when that container is handed into the surgeon's hands." Then she turned to him, her eyes lit with fierce determination. "Ethan, remember this. Power is not meant to feed the ego. Power exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. A little girl, a family, thousands of patients. That is why I will never give Phoenix Air another chance." Ethan sat still, his heart pounding with every word. In that moment, he understood this was not just a lesson in business. It was a lesson in the responsibility of leadership. The cabin lights shifted to a calming blue, signaling the plane had cleared turbulence. On the screen, the ETA dropped to 3 hours 12 minutes. Sophia exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing slightly, but her eyes still hard as steel. Far below, Phoenix Air staggered, its stock price plunging, its Ko Ingersoll begging in vain. But in the skies above, a far more important race was underway, a race where the fragile life of a child was waiting. The grey night sky gave way to the lights of New York emerging below. The glowing patches of the city stretched endlessly like a brilliant galaxy. But inside the Gulf Stream, G550, no one had the heart to admire the view. Every eye was locked on the monitor, showing the vital signs within the biological container. ETA 042. Ethan Wells swallowed hard, feeling as though every tick of the clock was shortening his own life. Beside him, Sophia Grant sat upright, her gaze fixed on the silver watch on her wrist. With each passing second, she was not only counting down the time left on the flight, but also the fragile breaths of a 7-year-old girl waiting at Mount Sinai. The intercom came alive. "We are approaching JFK. Runway 3 has been cleared. Escort team is in position." The plane dipped lower, its body shuddering against the wind. Through the round window, Ethan saw lightning flash at the horizon, illuminating the first streaks of rain slashing down. "Please God, no delays," he muttered. Sophia heard him, tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but edged with steel. "There is no room for prayer, only action." When the wheels struck the runway, the screech of brakes echoed through the cabin. The G550 slowed hard, then veered sharply into the private terminal. 2 NYPD vehicles waited, their lights spinning red and blue. Alongside, a Grant Dynamics medical transport van sped into place, its rear doors already open, cooling systems primed. The technicians immediately unlocked the container, every move executed in silence, swift and precise to the point of coldness. Within 53 seconds, the container was secured inside the medical van. Dr. Anna Sharma, the lead surgeon, appeared in a blue surgical coat, the marks of a mask still visible on her face from hours of waiting. She took the container from the technicians, her eyes flashing with relief, though her voice remained urgent. "Thank you, but we have less than an hour for the transplant. Traffic has been cleared, but everything must be flawless." Sophia stepped forward, meeting the doctor's eyes. She did not smile, she only nodded. "That little girl will have her new lung tonight, not a second late." Dr. Sharma nodded sharply, then climbed into the van. The police cars wailed as the convoy tore through the rainy night toward the hospital. Ethan stood still, chest heaving. He had never seen a handoff so tense, where the smallest mistake, a traffic jam, a single minute of delay could cost a life. Sophia watched the convoy disappear. Her hair was wet with rain, yet her eyes burned like forged steel. Ethan caught a glimpse of her hand, tightening slightly around the silver watch, like an unspoken vow. Elsewhere, just a few blocks away, the phone of Phoenix Air's CEO rang without pause. Messages poured in from Wall Street, from the board of directors, from furious investors. Images of Flight 762's cancellation spread across social media, igniting outrage. But to Sophia Grant, all of it was now a distant echo. She knew the real battle was unfolding in an operating room at Mount Sinai. In the heart of Manhattan, heavy rain poured down as if trying to swallow the city lights. On the top floor of Mount Sinai Hospital, the operating room lights blazed without rest for hours. Figures in blue surgical coats moved like dancers in a tense rhythm. The steady beeping of the monitors echoed, each sound striking the hearts of those waiting outside like a hammer. Inside an Escalade parked not far away, Sophia Grant sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her phone screen. Ethan Wells sat beside her, his hands clenched so tightly his nails pressed into his skin without him realizing it. He had never experienced silence so heavy. Outside were the sounds of sirens and rain tapping against the glass, but inside the car, there was only the pounding rhythm of 2 anxious hearts. Then the phone vibrated. A message appeared. Sophia opened it, the glow of the screen lighting her face. A photo filled the display. Dr. Anna Sharma inside the operating room, mask removed, her eyes weary but shining with relief. Her fingers formed the signal of success. The caption was brief. The lung has been transplanted, heartbeat stable. The little girl is a fighter. Sophia exhaled slowly. For the first time in a day, her shoulders eased. A faint smile touched her lips. Not the smile of a CEO who had just toppled a corporation, but the smile of a woman who had saved a life. Ethan saw the change in her, astonished. He asked softly, You feel relieved now?" Sophia turned, her eyes deep, and nodded. "Ethan, remember this. Revenue can be lost. Contracts can be cancelled. Stocks can crash. But life must never be treated lightly. Every decision we make must put human lives first. That is the true value of power." Meanwhile, in Dallas, the CEO of Phoenix Air sat dazed in an empty boardroom. On the large screen, the stock chart plunged like a death spiral. The board of directors was in an emergency session while his phone buzzed non-stop with furious messages from investors. One mistake at Gate 44B had turned an entire corporation into a global laughingstock. No one remembered the name Brenda Miller, the woman who uttered that contemptuous line. But everyone would remember the day Phoenix Air fell to its knees before a female CEO in simple joggers. Sophia leaned back against her seat, her eyes on the New York sky, slowly lightening with dawn. She whispered to herself, "There is no need to shout to prove power. Sometimes true strength is silence and an irreversible decision." Ethan stayed quiet, his heart pounding. He knew this was a historic moment. A story that would be told again in boardrooms, in business schools, and on the front pages of newspapers. And so the night closed. A fragile life had been saved. A giant airline had collapsed. And it had all begun with a single contemptuous smile at a boarding gate. In business, money and contracts are just numbers, but respect is the true foundation. A single contemptuous smirk, a small prejudice, can ignite a disaster worth billions. Sophia Grant reminded us of an undeniable truth. When respect disappears, trust collapses, and an entire empire can be brought to its knees. If you believe that every human being deserves to be treated fairly, leave a like for this story. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next dramatic journeys, where truth and power are always put to the test. And before you go, drop a short comment. Respect first. Because sometimes even the smallest reminder is enough to change the world.